Hello everybody and welcome to the Kube Vanguard. I am back. I was away for quite a while. Well, not necessarily in body, but in spirit. I took a bit of a break from all this community activity for a while because the summer started off a little bit wild. We had wildfires in, well, not in Toronto, but they were in northeast Ontario and Quebec. And the smoke from them hit Toronto. And there were some days you went outside and it reminded me of when I used to smoke 20 years ago. So to translate that into something even more painful, imagine if you quit drinking 20 years ago and then you started getting hangovers, right? So that's the feeling. So it was rough. And then just got a bit, tired. Summer's a time you need to relax, take a bit of time off. And I ended up going on vacation to the Caribbean, which was wonderful. The interesting part of it was I realized that I'm a net junkie because the place I went to only had internet in the hotel lobby. And I go on these wild treks through these kind of sand dune jungle things. And I'd suddenly think, oh, I should check this. And I can't check it. What am I going to do? So be careful because this stuff, it'll catch up with you. I also got food poisoning and I had heat stroke too. So it was an eventful holiday. But it started off, it was good, don't worry. But it did start off a bit of a scare. So I was out in this kind of jungle-like setting right near the beach. And there were mosquitoes attacking me. And by the way, don't buy Canadian bug repellent and take it to the Caribbean. You know why? Because I got a feeling that it's opposites kind of thing. So the bug repellent works here against local bugs. Down there, they find it kind of exotic. Oh, that's an interesting bug repellent. And the more I put on, the more they attacked. Honestly, if I didn't put the bug repellent on, they kind of, get stung once in a while. The minute I put the bug repellent on, it was crazy. Anyways, apart from that, I had a bit of a scare the first day. So I was out in this kind of jungle place, about maybe a mile away from the hotel. This was kind of a remote location. And there was no light pollution, right? So you can see the stars. I was looking at the stars, wondering about, the meaning of life, why do I work in IT, all that kind of stuff that you think about in those situations. And then suddenly I sit there and I see these 10 lights in a row, okay? Equal distance apart in the sky, and then they disappear. And this is like a week or two after, in the U.S. Congress, there was a whistleblower and two other folks saying that the U.S. government knows about UFOs, they're flying around, and I thought, can you believe this? The first day of my vacation, these UFOs, these aliens are going to invade. And that really annoyed me. I'm glad they didn't show up because I would have taken the bug repellent. No, wait until the end of my vacation. It's not fair. You can understand, I work in IT, I get this vacation. You do not invade on day one, okay? I don't need disaster recovery on day one. Anyways, no problems. I got back to the hotel and I started to Google and I found out it's not aliens. It's that Musk fellow again doing something silly. He's got those Starlink satellites and they're lower in orbit and they're like a whole bunch in a row. And what happens when they're flying in the night sky, at some point there's an angle where they reflect off the sun. So you see them, and they're all bright, and then it disappears like that. You think they're aliens, right? Fifth dimension. In fact, it's that temper tantrum fella who's doing it again. So I felt relieved about that. But then I had to recover from the bugs. All right, enough of my vacation stories. Let's get back to the Kasten documentation. By the way, when you go on vacation, come back, you're a bit rusty. I actually did the show before, and I turned the wrong microphone on. The microphone that doesn't work. And so it was wonderful and a very silent show, which some people might appreciate. But it, loses its educational value without my jokes. All right, so I will now put on my glasses. I don't wear my glasses anymore because I haven't solved this lighting reflection thing. You might think I'm a UFO. So I haven't done that yet. All right, let's switch now to the screen. And, wrong screen. So this is what happens when you come from vacation. However, I do know how to solve that. Look at that, see? Never lose your cool, even under pressure. So what are we talking about this week? Well, first of all, I haven't talked about Kasten in a while, and there have been some releases. So you see right now at 6.4. I don't know what the last one was, so let's take a look and see. Not much. I can't remember the last one was either 6.3 that we looked at or 6.2, but there hasn't been anything out of this world. This is a UFO. I haven't influenced stuff. Maybe they were UFOs, Maybe I didn't realize it. But nevertheless, there's some changes taking place, some fixes. One thing that's interesting is you can see in both this 6.4 and in 6.3 API stuff. So here, improve performance of restores by optimizing the number of API calls meant for fetching storage classes, okay? And then in 6.3, I remember seeing improved execution times of backups and restores by removing API calls meant for discovering the version of the Ingress resource. Okay, so what is all about this API stuff? So an easy way to think about it, if you take a real-world example. A real-world example I like to use is K3s, okay? It's the, known as the Kubernetes Edge distribution. And the story behind that is the fellow, and I can't remember his name, I'll have to Google it at some point, because I'm not in the middle of a jungle. I have internet. He went through all the API calls of vanilla Kubernetes, so K8s, and he saw things that he thought were just not needed. And they're just slowing the whole thing down, making it heavy, and he removed them. And that's why K3s is so fast. And an example of one of the ones he removed, or a bunch of the ones he removed, is there were a bunch of so-called in-tree storage API calls. So in other words, vendors would come to the Kubernetes Foundation, whatever, and say, hey, this is my piece of storage. Here's my API calls. Put it inside the Kubernetes API bundle, so to speak, right? To talk in kind of the vernacular. But this made things very bloated, obviously, and also very difficult because, if you make a change, then you have to wait for the next release of Kubernetes. So obviously, as you all know, they moved to the CSI, Kubernetes storage CSI, Container Storage Interface, all right? Similar to the network one as well. And what that meant was they created these plugins, and then the vendors wrote to the plugins. So that means the vendor can change their driver at any time. They don't rely on the release. And the other plus thing is you can remove a lot of these things from the kernel. Not the kernel, I'm thinking VMs now, from the APIs, which they're doing, but it's kind of slow. He just went and took them all out, right? So there you go. So that's, I think, what Kasten are doing now. They're looking at their API calls, and they're trying to optimize them, trying to make things faster performance, better for security, just all around. And that's a lot of work because you don't want to lose features, you don't want to lose things that you need, but you want to improve performance. So they're working on that, and that, I think, is the biggest story there. Improved rendering time of restore points page. Yeah, whatever. It's good. Some, OpenShift virtual machines. Okay. But nothing like, transform sets. Nothing like that's come out yet. All right. So let's go back to the topic. I think the last time we talked about immutable backups, I'll have to see. I can't remember. It was so long ago. But we're going to start on the section about protecting applications. I say start because it's not small, and I spent too much time talking about UFOs on my vacation. Nevertheless, let's start. And so, again, I'll remind you the Kubernetes Kasten documentation is very nice to the eyes, okay? This is not some kind of, Meridian Nortel documentation, a little whatever, which I used to look at. It's very pleasant to read, okay? Little pictures there, and the font, I really like it. Okay. So, when we start talking about protecting applications, one of the first things you'll notice here, and you can read through the details yourself, but this snapshots and backups, okay? This is something that I think it's worthwhile spending a little bit of time we have left talking about because it's important. And it is similar to what you've seen before in virtualization, like in vSphere, that snapshots are not backups, okay? Very important. Obviously, before you do some big upgrade or something in vSphere, you want to take a snapshot. It's very easy and quick to just get your virtual machine back to the state it was in. But those are not backups, okay? If you're starting to talk Veeam language, the only thing where snapshots are not backups, but where they're linked to retention is in replication. So when you're using Veeam to replicate virtual machines, the retention in vSphere is snapshots. But apart from that, snapshots are not backups. Same applies here. And what's interesting is they say, depending on your environment and requirements, you might need just one or both of these data capture mechanisms. So why is that? Well, first of all, there's the generic backup and restore. And I'll remind you what that is. That's when you don't have a CSI driver or you can't take snapshots for whatever reason, and so it uses canister and injects a sidecar container into your application and sends the backup right away off to your location profile. Location profile, another quick review, we went over that. That is where your backups are located. It can be S3, it can be NFS, and if you were using the vSphere CSI driver, it can be Veeam, a backup repository. Only the data, though, the metadata would still have to go to one of the other types of location profiles, okay? So what they're saying here is depending on your environment, you can use both or just one. So why would you want to use both? Well, if you can leverage snapshotting, it's good to have always more copies the better, even if it's a snapshot copy. Unlike vSphere, having a snapshot is not going to affect performance, okay, Kubernetes. So as you know, if you have snapshots in vSphere, it's not good to have them for a long time, okay? Never to run off a snapshot either, that's really bad, because it gets bloated and whatnot, but it does affect the performance after a while. So that does not happen here. So what you can do is you can have snapshots and you can restore from them, you can restore anything you need, but remember that's not your backup. It's on the same cluster, everything that happens to that cluster, it's gone. Backups are on your location. So that's what it's telling you. And remember that if you're not going to use snapshotting, which for another reason could be that, for instance, if you're doing like a logical dump of a database, MySQL, and using the logical dump, it's going to use Canister, and you don't want to use the full application where it would be a combination of snapshot and using some application hooks, then it'd be similar to generic. It's going to send it right off to S3. Okay, then there's about scheduling, because you're going to schedule your snapshot or backups or both, and your retention objective, so how long you want them for, and we'll look at that as well. Selection, and this is important as well, and it's getting better and better all the time. This defines not just which applications are protected by a policy, but whenever finer grained control is needed. So you can resource filter, and you can use to restrict what is captured on a per application basis. So it's very straightforward here, and we'll go into this a bit next week when I will actually do a backup and a snapshot of backup. But the documentation is wonderful, and it goes into some details about cloud providers. Obviously, with cloud providers, things always have their own little way. Likewise with OpenShift. So you want to make, if you are leveraging those things, you should always read carefully any notes about them specifically. Okay, so I will leave it here for now because I spent too much time talking about UFOs and my vacation. But just to tell you that next week we'll be back and we'll be continuing with protecting applications, and we will actually do it, okay, as opposed to this week it was just me talking. All right, welcome back to Kube Vanguard. We will see you next week again.